when I came into the Monday morning, the table read, everything was perfect because he had seen to it. And all I had to do is be crazy Lucy, fine.
Carol Burnett, a name that evokes humor, charm, and timeless elegance. For decades, she was America's adored comic queen, bringing laughter to living rooms across the country on Saturday nights. With her distinctive ear tug and comforting grin, she embodied smart, hilarious, and soul-healing humor. But behind the comedic routines and musical performances, there is one moment that Burnett has never been able to laugh at. It happened in 1977 on what should have been a typical night of television gold. The Carol Burnett Show was at its peak, with sky-high ratings and a devoted audience who adored every wig, costume, and pratfall. The cast was perfect. What about the chemistry? Unmatched. However, in the middle of this comedy nirvana, one sketch left such a deep personal impression that Burnett has refused to watch the show again. She's been asked about it occasionally, and always with care. Every time her eyes fog over, she gives a tight smile and gently pivots in discussion. There's no scandal, no headlines, just a subtle, lingering pain that even decades of accolades cannot completely erase. What actually transpired that night? What could possibly shake a woman known for her invulnerability? This is the untold story of Carol Burnett's one sketch that she wishes had never aired, and the personal suffering that comedy couldn't conceal. By 1977, the Carol Burnett Show had established itself as a cultural institution. It debuted in 1967 as one of the few variety shows headed by a woman, making it a trailblazer in every way. Carol had already made history as the first female host of a primetime comedy variety series. However, rather than simply creating history, she made America laugh. Week after week, viewers tuned in to watch their favorite characters, such as the irreverent Eunice, the ditzy Mrs. Wiggins, and the ever-grumpy Mr. Tudball. Along with Burnett, comic luminaries Harvey Korman, Tim Conway, and Vicki Lawrence brought an electrifying vitality to each drawing, making it glitter. The show was more than just funny. It was profoundly human. Carol's famous quanda with the audience at the beginning of each show became a trademark, and her spontaneity and quick wit were unparalleled. Her humor had a certain warmth to it. Nothing nasty or cruel, just characters exaggerated to the point of silliness, but never without heart. Behind the scenes, the cast and crew became a close-knit family. The rehearsals were long, and the writing sessions were rigorous, but laughter could always be heard on the soundstage. Scripts were reviewed, jokes debated, and routines rewritten, all in the interest of good taste and comedy. Carol Burnett had a rule: do not punch down. Humor should be welcoming, upbeat, and clever, not cutting or cheap. So, when that fateful episode arrived, a screenplay that many suspected would push the boundaries further than usual, no one predicted how much it would cost. Not in the ratings, not a public backlash. However, grief is felt privately. Carol would never forget what happened in front of the cameras that night, or how she felt when the lights went down and the audience left. Because even the funniest show on television can take things too far. The program in question aired on a cool night in early 1977. On the surface, it appeared to be any other episode of The Carol Burnett Show. A filled house, a vibrant beginning, and the typical chemistry amongst the group. But buried midway through the show was a sketch that, even in the writer's room, raised a few questions. The sketch, titled A Visit from Aunt May, was intended to be a comedic take on a Southern family reunion. Carol played Aunt May, a loud, inquisitive, over-the-top character based on classic Southern stereotypes. It was intended to be harmless, just a caricature. The problem, however, was not with the character, but with the script's subtext. The humor drew on stereotypes about mental illness and cognitive decline. What was first portrayed as amusing gradually devolved into uncomfortable terrain, making light of symptoms that closely resembled those connected with Alzheimer's disease. The cast, which included Harvey Korman and Tim Conway, delivered their typical dedicated performances. The audience laughed, but not as loudly or freely as before. Carol, always a professional, hit her marks and kept the pace, though several crew members subsequently noted a perceptible strain in her delivery, a forced intensity that was unusual for her. Carol's beloved father had recently been diagnosed with dementia, which no one watching knew, and even some of her co-stars were unaware of at the time. It started early, and the deterioration was abrupt. Watching him forget her name during a phone call damaged something inside her. The anguish was raw. The wounds are still open. Carol apparently expressed anxiety after reading the sketch for the first time. She did not find it funny. She considered it hazardous. However, producers' desire to keep the show seeming fresh and pushing the envelope influenced the choice. Carol, the perfect team player, grudgingly agreed. The skit aired. The ratings were strong. However, the following Monday, Carol came into the editing room and quietly asked the director to remove that sketch from future reruns. She did not want to see it again. She did not want it remembered. Unfortunately, prior to digital control, the episode had already been disseminated to syndication partners around the country. It was out there. Television history will never be erased. Carol never watched the episode again. And to this day, she has refused to discuss it in detail, saying only that it didn't age well or it wasn't our finest moment. But those who knew her, those who noticed the tear marks on her dressing room mirror that night, knew it was more than that. It wasn't merely a sketch. It was a heartbreak captured on film. Carol Burnett is known for many things, including her comedic timing, musical aptitude, and grace under pressure. What about vulnerability? That was something she rarely let the world see. Something changed after the A Visit from Aunt May recording. Crew members were the first to discover it. Carol lingered behind after wrapping, alone. No supper with the cast. There are no jokes in the hallway. She sat in her dressing room for nearly an hour. The door cracked just enough to let the faint tones of quiet resonate down the corridor. When her assistant arrived, Carol was holding her head in her hands, her makeup smeared with quiet weeping. Later that night, she phoned her sister. "I think I made a mistake," she explained. The culpability was double. As a performer, she felt she had failed her own expectations. Her comedy had always stemmed from love, never scorn, and yet she had permitted a sketch to air that felt vicious, albeit unintentionally. But there was a deeper ache, personal loss. Her father's condition had deteriorated rapidly. He had been hospitalized the week before that program aired after walking off alone and being discovered disoriented in a shopping center. Carol had spent her free time combining studio rehearsals with frantic phone calls to doctors, balancing punchlines with discomfort. The doodle landed too close. It insulted what was hurting her in secret. Carol worked harder in the months that followed to screen every script. She got increasingly vocal about which jokes crossed the line. Though she never mentioned it explicitly in interviews, writers noted her softly editing any sequences that made light of illness or vulnerability. Comedy was sacred to her, but so did compassion. Certain scars never entirely heal, but Carol Burnett's calm resilience ensured that the world never saw her break, except in those occasional poignant fissures when the laughing faded. When word filtered quietly through entertainment circles that Carol Burnett had withheld an episode from airing, responses were as diverse as the industry itself. Some networks grumbled. They had already purchased syndication rights, and now they were being asked to forego an entire issue with no formal justification. It was unusual for a performer to exercise that kind of creative control after an episode aired, particularly in the 1970s. But this was Carol Burnett, and her impact in the industry was extensive. Nobody dared to press too hard. Behind closed doors, Hollywood muttered. Rumors began to circulate. Some claimed the sketch was politically inappropriate, while others suspected there was legal pressure involved. Some speculated a rivalry with the writers. However, those closest to the production recognized the truth. It was not about controversy, it was about something far more human. The episode had touched a personal nerve, and Carol had made the call out of grief rather than vanity or fear. Other performers privately expressed their support. Lucille Ball, one of Carol's closest friends, reportedly sent her a handwritten note that simply stated, "You have every right to protect your heart. I love you always." Comedians like Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore, who understood the emotional balance between art and life, offered support. They'd all performed in pain before. They all understood what it was like to look back on a moment and wish it had never happened. Unlike many in Hollywood, Carol did not make the incident a spectacle. There are no interviews. There is no tell-all memoir chapter. There's no blaming the writers or the network. She just tucked the memories away, like a never-sent letter, and resumed her career with the same grace that had made her a legend. In an industry obsessed with history, Carol Burnett's simple choice to withdraw a single skit said volumes. It reminded her colleagues that even symbols may bleed, and that sometimes the most powerful thing a performer can say is, "This one's not for the spotlight." Carol Burnett's body of work is still one of the most famous in television history. Her show aired for 11 wonderful seasons and inspired generations of comedians, sketch artists, and performers. She paved the way for female-led comedy and established herself as the gold standard of elegance under pressure. But amidst the laughing and acclaim, she elected to keep a single chapter private. She did not obliterate it with hatred. She did not dispute its existence. She just chose not to revisit it, because some grief, no matter how carefully disguised by humor, still burns when relived. That 1977 episode is still a ghost in her archives, a time when the boundary between performance and personal tragedy became too blurry, when comedy couldn't save her from grief. Rather than pretend it never happened, she honored her emotions in the most dignified way possible by letting them go. Fans continue to appreciate her for her vulnerability as well as her talent. They remember her contagious laughter, the renowned Tarzan yell, and her close relationship with the crowd. Those who know the story of the lost episode also recall her integrity. Carol Burnett demonstrated that true legends have the freedom to select what they share and what they reserve for themselves in an era where popularity frequently requires excessive exposure. That sketch may have been lost to reruns, but Carol's decision to preserve her heart will live on in Hollywood's memory. Not only was she a legend for making the world laugh, but she also knew when to leave the stage. Only once, quietly. And that is why her legacy lives on, untouched, unshakable, and unforgettable.